I'm very happy to be here. Thank you all for coming out. I almost feel like I lived 5 years in the tropics. I almost feel like we should have a tropical talk today. We can all pretend we're looking for some exotic lizard in the Amazon. But I will focus on Canada. This is where I work now. I spent a long time chasing very exciting global tools and processes and participating in things that were high level and made me feel very important. But what I also realized was that if you really want to get stuff done, you need to start somewhere concrete. So you can do that at the policy level in Canada, at the federal scale, the provincial territorial scale. At the regional scale, you have to start thinking about landscapes. And then when you get to the local scale, that's where feet are on the ground and you can actually get stuff done. So I've been really impressed by the conservation work that occurs in this region in particular. I hope you know it, but it's actually a global model for some types of conservation work, particularly around ecological connectivity. I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute, but there are others here and who would probably talk about it better than I. So the title of my talk is, and I have French on some slides, and I won't really speak in French, and it's a bit of a franglais mix, but I hope that if you want to ask a question or if there's anything, there's not French on every slide, so because it ended up being tons of text, but just ask me a question anytime you want to. So what I'm really interested in and what I study and work on is trying to figure out what nature do we concentrate on? Because what I've noticed in conservation is that we are very resource poor. It is extremely hard to get funding to do scientific research around conservation and to then do the actual conservation work. So we do have to focus in on things that might actually stop biodiversity loss and then also make the environment continue to function in the ways that make it livable and that make it livable for other species as well. So what do we want to conserve in Canada? And then obviously, how can we actually do it? How do we do that conservation work? And my thesis is that we really need to do it together. I've put in a little quote here from David Suzuki. I don't know if anyone saw his interview recently where he was more pessimistic than I've ever seen him. He's always been a bit grumpy. But he said, yeah, with reason. But he said some things that I didn't even want to put up here because they were so depressing. But this is true. He said, "We have failed to shift the narrative and we're still caught up in the same legal, economic, and political systems that we have been that have led us here." So I'll come back to that at the end too, because we have so many tools now, we have so much knowledge, but we also really have to change the fundamental values that underlie our system. So I work for Wildlife Conservation Society Canada. Some of you might know the mothership. We're independent, but Wildlife Conservation Society is actually one of the oldest NGOs in the world. It's based in New York City. It runs the Bronx Zoo, the Brooklyn Zoo, the Long Island Aquarium. It has offices in about 60 different countries. It's a scientific organization. So we're researchers. We don't do advocacy work. We're really on the ground doing the kind of work that will feed directly into decisions, and we're very earnest people. We try to do it. We're really serious. We do the work seriously, but we don't really exaggerate much. So we know what the situation's all about. We have offices across the country. So our main headquarters is in Toronto, but actually we have a large program in Northern Ontario, which is a very big hotspot right now because that's where the Ring of Fire is, where they're trying to mine all the critical minerals for our energy transition. We have a program in the Western Arctic based in Whitehorse in the Yukon with people who fly up much further north all the time to study marine mammals and track underwater noise from increased shipping in the Arctic. We have a large program in the Northern Boreal Mountains, northern BC and southern Yukon. In a lot of these places, what we've shifted to doing is we're working with First Nations and Inuit communities in those areas to try to develop land use plans, to work with them on Indigenous protected and conserved areas, but then also study and track and monitor indicator species that require systems that work. So wolverines, for example, in Northern Ontario. if you have a healthy wolverine population, you still have a healthy forest. Same thing with ringed seals in the Arctic. So tracking these things give us an idea of how we're doing. And so that's really kind of what we do. We also have a Western bat program, which is really interesting. We've developed a prophylactic kind of an antibiotic for white nose syndrome, which is decimated little brown bats in eastern Canada. We used to have huge populations, and the disease is just moving into the west. So that's kind of what we do as an organization. But what I do is a little bit different than what my colleagues do. I work on a national program, and so we're interested in national scale policy, biodiversity indicators. How are we doing as a whole country, and how is our country contributing to the conservation of biodiversity at the global scale as well? So we're big on data, but we also don't like just data. We like data that matches what people's experience is on the ground. So that's kind of what and I'll tell you a bit about my own program in a bit. Today, what we're going to talk about is, the title of my talk, what do we want to conserve? I'm going to talk about one of these things that I think we should be conserving, which is my program, which is Key Biodiversity Areas, as a building block for conservation. And I'll talk about KBAs in this region as well. And then moving on to how do key biodiversity areas and any other shared framework and tool, how can that help us to focus efforts when resources are limited? There are a million tools out there. It's not actually that easy for conservation people on the ground to figure out what should we be doing, what tools should we be using, and we'll talk a bit about that too. And then, I'm going to give you the answer to that last one, which is that's not true. Okay, so the context, I won't stop on this for too long. Because I think we're all pretty clear on the picture that biodiversity is not doing very well in the world or in Canada or pretty much anywhere. So we actually do play a big role in conservation. A lot of people think, okay, biodiversity hotspots, when you go to a global meeting of, say, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, people focus on the tropics. People are so excited about the millions of species in the tropics. But that's just one way to define biodiversity. We have some of the last intact forests of the entire world. I didn't do that, but okay. We have 6% of the world's landmass with a very small amount of the world's population. That means we have vast areas that don't have they have a low density of humans. We have 1/4 of the world's wetlands and peatlands. That's pretty important. Peatlands, if you don't know, we have a peatland program actually that's just started up in my organization. And peatlands, which cover about 3% of the world's area, hold more carbon than all of the forests of the entire world. We really need to keep that carbon in the peatlands. The Ring of Fire, where they want to mine for critical minerals in northern Ontario, that's where the peatland is. We have 60% of the world's freshwater lakes. That's just crazy. And all the biodiversity that comes with that, it's not maybe millions of species, but they're species that are unique to the entire world. We have some of the world's largest remaining intact forests. We have 80,000 species and over 500 ecosystem types. This is another thing we're working on in my program. We haven't even classified all the different types of ecosystems in Canada. We don't have that information, but we're working on it. And we have 308 species that are only found in Canada. So globally, we've never seen so much biodiversity loss as we've seen in the past, say 30, 40, 50 years. And that's happening in Canada as well, especially in the very south of Canada, where clearly there's a lot of humans. That's where we all are, and that's where all the agriculture is as well, which has a big impact on biodiversity. But that's where all the biodiversity is. And it's really important these days too, because all the species that also occur in the United States, we're at the very northern edge of their ranges. And so they are going to survive in Canada when they may not survive as it gets hotter in the States. So they're really important, but that's where all the people and the food is. Canada's biodiversity is under increasing pressure, and 20% of species last assessed in Canada's Wild Species Report are found to be at risk. 20% doesn't seem so huge, but that's 16,000 species that are at risk of extinction. So that's not a great picture, but there's things that we can do. These are the 5 main threats to biodiversity. Probably not a surprise, these are all the things that we've brought. Some of the things that are a little harder to control, but that you're probably very familiar with in this area are invasive species. But it's really land use change that is a big deal in a place like this in the south of Canada. And so land use change, that occurs mostly where humans are. This is a map of human population density, but if you add human infrastructure, it looks like that. And people don't really know that. I think that people don't understand that the boreal, for example, you kind of think, oh, it's pristine, but that whole red zone, that's the boreal. It's crisscrossed by logging roads, all sorts of different infrastructure for mining, oil and gas, and logging. So it's that's having a big impact. That's the main thing that's had an impact on caribou, for example. Caribou used to be spread across the entire country. Now we have pockets of 30 caribou in Gaspésie, and 8 caribou of a remaining population were killed by an avalanche in Banff about 20 years ago. They're really small pockets now, and that's because they're so sensitive to these kinds of roads, even logging roads, and deforestation, which removes their food, which is lichens. Okay, I think we've had enough about the sad part. Let's talk about what we can do. So this, as I mentioned before, this is a question that I just am obsessed with. I'm 47. Throughout my whole life, maybe the chutzpah of the young, when I was 20, I was just like, what do I do to save the world? Like, what's the one job I can do or that I can get that will save biodiversity? And I've relaxed a little bit since then, but I still have this feeling that we should be able to do a lot, and I can never really quite figure out what's going to make the biggest impact. So, when I was young, these were the things that we talked about when we talked about biodiversity conservation. These are the charismatic megafauna, is what we call them. They're the iconic species that everybody wants to save. They're so beautiful and they're big and you can see them. I still want to save these guys, and actually a lot of these are at risk as well. But we also have these guys. Who knows these guys? These are species that only occur in Canada. So they are endemic species. This is called the cobblestone tiger beetle. It lives on one beach in New Brunswick. That's the maritime ringlet, that funny little butterfly. It also lives in New Brunswick and a little bit in Quebec too, across the border. And there's only 5 sites where they exist, and people have been searching for them for a long time. So we know that they don't exist anywhere else. And so we are so responsible for these little guys too. And I want people to care about them because they are, they are amazing, and each of them has an amazing story. And each time one of these things winks out, obviously it has an impact. It means something. It means that our system is becoming more simplified, and we don't want that because it's a sign of things to come. So endemic species are a big focus of us. These are some of the hot spots for endemic species across Canada. They're often places where the glaciers kind of passed them by and they remained unglaciated in certain parts of prehistory or history. And so you get species there that died off everywhere else, but they only exist in these places. And of course, we're not just talking about species. Ecosystems are assemblages of species that interact in really, really particular ways, and they're balanced and they do the thing that they're supposed to do. And it's so this is a native grassland. I think this picture was taken in Saskatchewan. And prairies and grasslands are some of the most endangered and least talked about ecosystems in the world. We often talk about forests and maybe wetlands, but grasslands in Canada, we've lost 80-something% of the grasslands that we had, because unfortunately they exist in the same places that we want to grow food in. But they're really biodiverse, they're very carbon rich. Native grasslands have meters of roots that store carbon. They're they have all sorts of amazing birds that live there and nowhere else. So we don't have very much of these grasslands left. And so, in order to keep the species that all live there, we really need to look at the whole ecosystem. And we can't just look at tiny little patches. And we'll talk about the size of things because connectivity is such a theme in this region. But we need to think big when it comes to ecosystems and these things being able to maintain themselves into the future. So another thing that I got really into for my PhD and for years working was ecosystem services. There was a time when scientists, there was about a large number of people started a project called the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment that I was involved in to assess the state of the world's ecosystems and how it was impacting human well-being. And the idea was that nobody's fixing biodiversity, so let's show people what it's worth to them. And if you put dollar values or you show them how important it is to their daily lives, then they'll take action. It didn't really work, but I still think it's a very useful concept. Ecological connectivity is another target for what should we be conserving. And that's partially in the south of Canada because we only have these patches left. And if we want the species to remain that live in these little patches, we need to give them a way to be able to move on the landscape, to move with climate, to move with all sorts of global change that is occurring. So that is another thing that people are thinking about, and there's a lot of research going on about that. And really, this is, as I said before, an epicenter for, I've been to maybe 2 global scale conferences on ecological connectivity in the past two or 3 years. And the team from the Appalachian Corridor is always there, always giving a keynote speech. People are learning from them and the Yellowstone to Yukon group out west as well. So this here is the epicenter for that work. Okay, so I've been talking about, these are all the things that we could be focusing conservation work on. There's a lot of other things too. Some of these overlap with ecosystem services. We need to adapt to climate change. We need to manage ecosystems to be able to help species adapt to climate change. We really want good quality water. That's important. Where we get to spend time on Lake Massawippi, my family. We're very lucky. There's water quality issues. There's so much effort to try to intercept the nutrients that are getting into the water systems and map how the hydrology is flowing. And this is all really, really important work. Recreation also, people are very, tourism, all these things are important. And if you don't have the ecosystem, you don't have any of these things. I also want to draw attention to culturally and spiritually important places. Whenever you talk to politicians about things like that, it doesn't get much traction. But I think all of us know deep inside that that is maybe the most important thing that drives all of the work that we do. What's the world without all these things, So that's really, that needs to be part of it. And we need to normalize speaking in an emotional way about the environment. And I think some people are very good at that already. But I think we need to keep doing that. So one more target for conservation is something that I'm going to tell you about because this is what I've been doing for the last 6 years. So I was actually hired by Wildlife Conservation Society Canada to start a program to identify key biodiversity areas. And the idea was that this actually didn't exist in Canada. There are a million ways to identify places that are important for biodiversity, but they're not transparent. They might exist in a scientific paper. They might be, this is what they've chosen to do in Ontario. But it's very hard for people to understand why, if they weren't sometimes it's a modeling exercise, and you're like, okay, these are the biodiversity hotspots, but what have they included? What kind of data do they have access to? And it's hard to explain it to people and to get everyone on board. So about in maybe 2004, parties to IUCN, so all the countries of the world, asked for one tool. Could you have one tool that's completely standardized? It's quantitative. You put your criteria in there, and then you just know, and you can communicate really simply what is an area that is critical to stopping biodiversity loss. And so over the next 12 years after that, they developed and tested this global standard for identifying key biodiversity areas. So it captures sites of importance for all types of species, also for ecosystems in freshwater systems, in terrestrial systems, and in marine systems. So it's just one tool, and it can be used for everything, and everyone can understand it. Totally transparent. So what it captures, it has a whole set of criteria. I think I'll give you one example of how the criteria work in a minute. But it captures sites that are important for threatened biodiversity, that's species and ecosystems, for rare biodiversity, these endemic species that I was talking about, and ecosystems, for sites of the highest, what we call ecological integrity, so the places that are least disturbed by industrial human activities. They capture places where species aggregate, so caribou calving grounds, or places where bats hibernate in huge numbers. We have a key biodiversity area that has the largest aggregations of garter snakes in the entire world. So it's in a place called Narcisse in Manitoba, and all the snakes come out on Mother's Day. So it's a great place to take your moms for Mother's Day. I highly recommend it. You go to these caves, and there are tens of thousands of garter snakes just writhing in these balls. I mean, maybe not everybody likes snakes, but it's a sight to behold, you can imagine. And nothing like that exists anywhere else in the world in that size. So this is what key biodiversity areas capture. And I want to also say that right from the beginning, I didn't want to develop just another tool. So we knew that this tool would be useful in Canada, but we have a lot of expertise. We have a lot of biodiversity programs across Canada, and people are quite sort of convinced that they have the things that they need already. So we took many years to talk to people across the country. I think I was giving a presentation every 2 days for about 2 years to every other non-governmental organization, to every provincial and territorial government, to the federal government, every department, to mostly we had regional gatherings of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. Oh, cool. And it was really with the idea of, if we're going to do this, we don't want it to just be another tool that sort of gets left behind somewhere. It has to be something that we can all get behind, all agree upon, all take action on afterward, take ownership of this, and understand. So that was the idea behind it. It's a social process. I think, to me, conservation is very much a social process. The science is good, but no one's going to use it unless you have conversations. And lots of people were saying, oh, I don't know if this is useful for us. And I said, okay, tell me why. And we had conversations, and some people were convinced, some people were not. That was absolutely fine, too. So these are all the groups that were involved. We also have a global partner. So there is a global key biodiversity area program. We contribute to them. They sometimes contribute to us as well. And this is what we have so far. We're still working on it. So what it looks like is we have coordinators in every province and territory. They are people they're scientists with big networks. They get all the, they scope out where are the likely key biodiversity areas. They talk to the snake experts, the lichen experts, the slug experts, the ecosystem experts, and they map out where they might be. And then meticulous work. Each KBA proposal takes several years, and there's opportunities for technical review. And then we also reach out to the municipalities, to the Indigenous communities nearby, any NGO that's local, to say, here, this is what we're working on. Do you have any input? It's an incredibly intensive process, but it pays in dividends. We have tons of involvement. We have a network of thousands of people who've been involved in this program across the country, and we've learned a huge amount about what drives people to do conservation in different places. So a few examples of KBAs across the country, and then I'm going to show you some examples of KBAs in this region. So Sable Island, I don't know, it's very hard to get to Sable Island. It's people probably know it from, it's got wild horses on it and in the sand, and it's very picturesque. It also has 5 or 6 endemic insects that exist nowhere else in the world, just Sable Island. And then it has one of the largest aggregations of gray seal in the entire world that gather there at a certain time of their life cycle. So it meets the different criteria for each one of these species. Fraser River Estuary, that's in British Columbia. This is one of the biggest key biodiversity areas we have. It meets KBA criteria for everything from killer whale to something called the Georgia Basin bog spider, tiny little spider, and then lots of birds as well. And these are some pictures of them. And so each one of those is present in the site in a particular, it meets a threshold. So it has like 1% of the global population is present at this site. And depending on the KBA criterion, you need a certain percentage of the global or national population to be present at that site. Sydenham River, a totally different kind of key biodiversity area, but it still meets the criteria. It's a river in the most intensive agricultural area in Ontario, where you have all these types of mussels that exist, again, here and nowhere else in the world, and they're just hanging on by a thread because the pollution is so bad. But there's a huge amount of community effort to try to restore the area, to try to restore the bandes riveraines and like the, I don't know what that is in English now. Trying to stop runoff and pollution and try to restore that water quality, which, you know, the mussels would do themselves if they had a chance, because they are water quality filterers. So our initiative in Quebec is run out of the University of Sherbrooke, so right here in the area. Our regional coordinator is Kim Gauthier-Scamper. She is a fantastic person who's been involved for 5 years. She works with Professor Dominique Gravel. We had our first PhD student who just graduated. We have postdocs together. So having a relationship with a research community is also very important to this work, because we often find, oh, we don't know how to do this. Let's get a student on this. So this has been, anyone is very welcome to contact, well, either me or this group here. They're really keen to work. They're also they are the co-founders of a group called Biodiversité Québec, which I imagine the Appalachian Corridor is involved with too. And they are working with the government, so they're also part governmental, to figure out monitoring of biodiversity at the provincial scale. So we're part of that group. And again, it's very designed to make sure that the work that we do is fitting into a local context. It's not just, you know, being imposed on anybody from the national scale, which really wouldn't work in Quebec, but it also doesn't work in other provinces or territories either. And this is what we'd call a brouillon. Like, this is the work in progress for key biodiversity areas in this area. And the places that are obviously the biggest lumps are the montagnes vertes. So those green mountains are spectacular for biodiversity, but not just for biodiversity. They're spectacular because they're part of a corridor that will, if it continues to exist, it is the only intact forest of this type anywhere across this region. And it goes all the way down to the south of the United States. And they're trying to improve it. So the whole Appalachian Corridor, and in the States, it's mostly the Nature Conservancy that runs it. Up here, it's an amazing consortium of organizations, and they're trying to figure out how to restore the places that need to be restored, connect the places that need to be connected. I was talking to someone as part of it last week, and they're, you know, trying to get funding to have overpasses like they have in Banff over Highway 10. Imagine that, like, just even as a symbol, you're driving down Highway 10 and you see, oh, this region really cares about its biodiversity. You have these beautiful wildlife overpasses. There's already one underpass. Unfortunately, it's not working so well because there's so much development around the underpass that the animals are staying away. So it needs to be all done at the landscape scale, but it's incredible. And these are key biodiversity areas. Raise your hand in this room if you've ever seen a spiny soft-shell turtle. A spiny soft-shell turtle. Okay, I haven't seen one either. But I'm going to give you a few examples of key biodiversity areas. Baie Missisquoi. Has anyone been to that bay? Okay. That has 5% of Canada's population of the spiny soft-shell turtle. That's a huge amount. That's a huge concentration of a species that we haven't seen. And it's just incredible. The fact that it only exists there is because this is such a special area. And so my feeling is, like, the collection of key biodiversity areas, there's going to be about 1,000, and they are really remarkable sites. They're not the thing that you're just going to have in your backyard. They are the places that do need to be connected through your backyard. But they are places that if we learned about that biodiversity across the whole country, it's incredibly inspiring. So the example that I was going to give, so yeah, it's a threatened species in a particular threat category. So to be a key biodiversity area, you needed at least 1% of the population of this turtle. We have 5% in this key biodiversity area, and that's a really remarkable amount. This is a really weird key biodiversity area. Chemin Saint-Armand-Québier. It looks like it's just a kind of a ditch next to a road in an agricultural area. It has 3 globally rare species. These are them right there. There's a moss that people would never probably notice. There's an orchid, and then there's a fern as well. You know, often when you're walking out in these amazing ecosystems, you might not know that you're surrounded by this incredible rarity and beauty, and I wouldn't know either. So this is a bit closer to here, Île du Marais de Sainte-Catherine de Hatley. So that has 2 incredibly rare odonata. So what's odonata? Dragonflies. Thank you. Yeah, there's incredible expertise again in Quebec. There are incredible botanists and entomologists. We have access. Just going to the insect museum at the Botanical Gardens in Montreal and talking to the people who work there is one of the most amazing parts of my job, and I get to do that across the country. So then, yes, this is still a work in progress. There's no such, you're not allowed to have KBAs that overlap. So these are, again, rough drafts. And they're trying to figure out how do you delineate sites in this place that has so much amazing biodiversity. So, yeah. So again, an amazing set of places. And I hope, and so you can go to the Key Biodiversity Area website yourself and explore, and you'll see where we're at with this project. There's site searches. You can, if you're interested in birds, you can search by bird, or if you're interested in snakes, you can search by snake or by province territory, all sorts of different places, freshwater or marine sites. So it's a great tool, and it's accessible to everyone. The data is free. We're truly trying to make it a building block. So I'll show you in a minute who's using it. But this is Bicknell's thrush, which exists at like Mont Mégantic, and there's a few other little higher area elevation places where this is one of the rarest birds in Canada. And so those sites will be KBAs as well. But basically, how can we work together to stop biodiversity loss? I'm not going to go through this in too much detail. Conservation science is supposed to make sense of all of this. It's not that easy to do. We've changed, our perspectives in conservation scientists. Conservation science really started in the 1970s. Before that, we had all sorts of frameworks for understanding the environment. We were romantics going out. We were like utilitarians. We were going to cut down all the forests and build amazing societies. And then we realized we went too far. And so conservation science was born in the 1970s, and people were, nature's in crisis. We need to limit growth. We were very alarmist and moral, and that was the beginning. Greenpeace, it was like, we need to save us from ourselves. And then we got into, this is what I was saying, I got into it too. Ecosystem services were like, how are we going to convince people that it's in their best interest? If they're not interested in bugs and pandas, how do we convince them? So ecosystem services, the green economy, nature-based solutions. These were the things that were supposed to appeal to businesses, society at large, governments. It didn't work so well, as I mentioned before, and then we're shifting now. So we have more of an embracing of lots of different values. So some people care about one thing, some people care about another thing, and we also have to take into account that we also need housing for everybody. There are a lot of conflicting or competing demands on our land but I think that there's a way to work together about this. So I've just mentioned some of the frameworks that were developed to try to help us work together, and these things are important to be able to work together across scales. And so the scale of conservation actions really affects the priorities and what we're focused on in the work that we do day to day. So at the local level, we're actually doing the work, and we're doing the work that responds to the needs of communities and to threats that are actually occurring on the ground. And as we move up, it becomes a little bit more theoretical, but there is a role to play at those higher scales. In fact, you know, local conservation work has gone on for decades, but the pace of impact and threat has increased so much that we do need to coordinate at a higher scale. So Canada has a bit of a big responsibility, but so we've committed at the national scale to all these global biodiversity targets. We've said we're gonna, I think the one that probably people have heard of is we're gonna conserve or protect 30% of Canada by 2030. People talk about that all the time. It's, you know, unlikely that we'll get there, but that's just one target. There's so many other ways. We don't need protected areas everywhere. There's ways to steward the environment without protected areas as well. It's kind of fun. But it's actually at the provincial and territorial scale where most land use decisions are made. And then more and more Indigenous nations are getting back rights or fighting for rights and taking a really important place at the head of environmental conservation. And one of the reasons that that's really important is that I mentioned before that we need to change our value systems. Many Indigenous nations have value systems that would work much better in terms of getting to a place where we can live with nature in a less sort of impactful way. So we have a lot to learn there, not everywhere, but in many places. Yeah, I'll keep going. So we need collaboration and partnerships. We all need to work together. So as I mentioned before, it's good to have a global framework to organize ourselves around, and there's all these really specific targets that we should be aiming for. But how do we do that? And I think for me, it's really about common language, common tools. Again, it's like, how does it work if we're trying to conserve the most important places for biodiversity across the country, but you know, every place has a different way of understanding that. It's impossible to know what's going on. It's really hard to learn from each other. So can we try to coordinate a little bit better and have these common tools and really not just develop the tool and say everybody has to use it, but try to do it together. Everybody needs access to the best data and information. That doesn't happen. It's really hard to get biodiversity data across. We have probably the largest collection of biodiversity data in the country, and that involves about 20 or 25 different data sharing agreements to have those and to look at them, and we're not allowed to share them with other people. We're working on making data available to everybody, so that's important too. And then we need to share what works, what doesn't work, and keep sharing. So that does happen. So the example I gave before, like, we don't have an approach for identifying areas of importance to biodiversity. And it allows a lot of governments to get away with a lot, actually. So I'll give you the example of Quebec. Hopefully it won't be sensitive, but in Quebec, it was really hard to get Quebec on board to identify these key biodiversity areas because they said, we have all the tools, we have all the data, we have all the information, we know where the areas of importance for biodiversity are. And all the NGOs came to us, and Nature Conservancy of Canada has funded our work in Quebec because they're saying, well, we don't know what they're doing. They may have all the information, the expertise, but they're not sharing it with us. And so to have one transparent data layer that the government has to look at and all the NGOs also get to look at and advocate for, and the public gets to see it, that's really, really important. So this knowing a common set of sites that are important for stopping biodiversity loss, it's a really particular thing, means that we can use that information to fight for all these different things and base our work on that. So focus in on those things together. And that's what's happening already. People have been grabbing this data sets, and we've been sharing data sets. It's all downloadable from the website, but also we give extra data if people ask for it. So we're making huge data sets, shipping it out across the country. It's now, KBAs are front and center in Canada's national biodiversity strategy, in our protected areas strategy, in a number of development decisions, and increasing. There was one in Newfoundland recently about wind farms, and they shouldn't, the policy for wind farm in Newfoundland is now not near KBAs. Toronto Greenbelt Development Commentary. Tree Canada just announced that they're focusing on key biodiversity areas as the core, as the noyau for all connectivity work, because what are you connecting? You should be connecting key biodiversity areas to other landscape parts to allow those really vulnerable species to survive. We're working with a number of First Nations that are basing their proposals for protected areas that will be governed by them on key biodiversity areas, and we're supporting that work by providing tons of data again. A number of funding organizations, the Weston Family Foundation, the BC Conservation Fund, they are prioritizing funding to key biodiversity areas. Not just to key biodiversity areas, because obviously there's a million other things that need to be funded, but there's so little funding for environmental work anyway that there's always going to be a competition for that. Biodiversity monitoring and surveys, Quebec has released OECM, so it's kind of a type of protected area that's less formal, and they're saying focus on key biodiversity areas. So what I really want to say is that diverse conservation values are not in conflict, but key biodiversity areas gives you an idea of, or an example of how to get people together to use one tool, and you can do that for a lot of different tools. And I think that the connectivity work, they're doing something similar with approaches to connectivity, and then merging that with key biodiversity areas, and then also with all the other things. This is a figure that I need to make a little bit prettier, but it's something that I use when people say, yeah, but what about other things? I don't believe that there's one tool out there that will do all that we want to do. But key biodiversity areas are this building block that you start off with. These are the places where you might stop biodiversity loss if you really were able to protect these sites, and it's site-scaled conservation. But then you need to add places of importance for biocultural values. That's mostly referring to indigenous values that are related to people's cultures and livelihoods and value systems and worldviews. That's really important. Also, we need to add in places that provide key ecosystem services. So flood control, really important these days. Water quality, extremely important. And also carbon-rich ecosystems. There's a lot of overlap between these values. We also need, number 4 there, places that are important for maintaining processes to safeguard biodiversity over the long term. So that's adding in connectivity, adding in areas that might be climate refugia, where species are better able to survive in these places. What we need to do is map out all of these things together and see, well, where are the overlaps? Where are the places that complement each other? We need to know all of this stuff, and we need to know it commonly so we can all work together on them. So I'm almost at the end here. This is a figure that came out as part of a report. I'm trying to remember who put together the report. I think WWF led this report, but there was a lot of scientists involved, and the report was about how do you bend the curve on biodiversity loss, because this is what biodiversity loss, this is the curve we're on right now, the gray one. We're only here, right? We have a long way to go, and that's what's happening. This is the projection of what's going to happen. And so with increased conservation efforts, we can bend that curve to do the things that I've been talking about already, and that is really already happening in this area. But to really bend it, and we're not even talking about going back up to there. We're talking about going up to just like, okay, let's be in a sustainable amount here and like a trend. You need increased conservation efforts, but you also need like some major things, more sustainable production. That means food production. Our food systems need to change, and you need more sustainable consumption. And that means our values have to change. So that's less waste and less consumption. So both of those things, that's about sustainable consumption. Let's stop consuming things. Also this idea of growth. How far can we grow? Is it really limitless? There's a lot of literature and research that I cannot get into today, but many of my colleagues work on limits to growth, these ideas. How far can we go? Where do we pass these thresholds until then we're in the side of a deficit, and this world will no longer work in the same way? We really need to change all of those things, those values. And I think that's what we can do. I think the fundamental thing we can do is talk to each other and really try to think of a different way of living. So this figure was published, it was the WWF report, but it's also published in Nature. So a few things just to finish. With limited resources, we do need to focus on the things that are going to make the most difference. But we need to think transformative. so amazing, though. It is transformative, Richard. It's incredible. We may be here for a while, but we have a lot of wine. So I'll stop talking soon and we can have some great conversations. So we need transformative integrated approaches that combine conservation, sustainable use, restoration with broader changes in how we operate. We can't just think that science is going to fix it. So we need to do this with common language, with a common set of tools, with transparency and communication. We can't keep everybody probably is a little proprietary over this is my project. We need to share everything and share responsibility and ownership, and also recognize local values. I think that often when things don't work across scales, it's because people come in from higher scales and they say, hey, actually this is how you should do it, and that's not usually true. So there needs to be listening across scales. We need to be proactive to allow people and nature to thrive together. This, I think, land use planning, figuring out in ahead, what do you want in your community in 50 years? What do you want it to look like? And plan, that includes development. Where should development occur? Critical minerals, I want to go back to critical, I don't know if you can hear me anymore. But, oh shoot. I was about to get to the beautiful photos and we were going to end on these gorgeous photos. Oh, maybe but I was going to say that just to revisit critical minerals, I don't know if that'll turn on by itself.
I'll try it. I'll just try it.
So I remember hearing a climate change activist, Bill McKibben, give a talk, and he was saying, please, environmental biodiversity people, don't stop the mining in Northern Ontario because we need those critical minerals to stop climate change. And our answer was, you can plan out where you mine those critical minerals. You can stay away from the peatlands. You can stay away from First Nations territories where they don't want you to be. You can also remove from your list of critical minerals all the military critical minerals that you've grouped in with your climate change critical minerals that the United States has asked you to mine. It's really, voila, merci. It's a different color. We've become more green as the night has progressed. So just to say, planning it ahead and deciding what you want and what you might want to leave, that is, because if you're always being reactive, you're not going to stop anything, because there's a lot of vested interests with a lot of resources. Yeah, I've already said this part, so I can move on. We want to build a nature positive movement. The final thing that I was going to say is that I'm always hopeful. You see all those terrible things, but there's so many people working on these issues, and so many people who care about these issues. And I think that sometimes we care, but then we don't change our behavior. But I think more and more people are changing behaviors in very important ways. And so we need to keep pushing that and keep doing that. And now I'm going to end on my beautiful photos. The Key Biodiversity Area Initiative, we run a photo competition every year. We're doing it for the 3rd year in the fall. All of the photos come from people across Canada, and they all have to take place in a key biodiversity area. So this one here is from Saskatchewan. Also Saskatchewan. We seem to have a lot of prairie photographers. This is Sable Island. This is a gray seal. We have this, but isn't this as spectacular as the seal?
Yeah.
This is a blue-gray tail dropper slug. It is just mind-blowingly beautiful. This is a humpback whale feeding on when I'm trying to remember what fish it is now. Krill, I think it is krill. And they appear in so these are aggregations that meet criterion D of the KBA, and then all the birds gather and all the whales gather, and it's incredible. So this is in Quebec. This is in the Chic-Chocs, which is a key biodiversity area not for this bird, not for the Gélina tupé, but for caribou and for some plants. And then this is a Bécassé semi-palmé. So that's a semi-palmated sandpiper. And that's in Baie de Rimouski in Quebec as well. So we also have some wonderful photographers in Quebec. And I will end there. Merci. And you can visit our website and also the WCS Canada website. And I just want to thank everyone, especially the Fondation Massawippi. Thank you, Hélène, for organizing all of this. Thank you, Margot. Thank you, Tim, as well, for helping with all of this. And thank you all for being here. It's hugely appreciated.